The wind howled like a dying animal across the frozen plains of Wyoming Territory, and Xander Finch thought he saw a ghost stumbling through the white curtain of snow until he realized ghosts probably did not leave crimson trails in their wake. He yanked his horse to a halt and squinted through the blizzard at the figure that swayed and fell, rose and fell again, moving forward with the desperate determination of something that refused to die, but clearly was trying its hardest. The woman collapsed into a heap of dark fabric and pale skin just 50 yards from where he sat, and Xander kicked his horse forward without thinking, his instincts overriding the cautious voice that had kept him alive through 6 hard winters in this unforgiving land. When he reached her, he saw she was young, maybe 20 years old, with long dark hair plastered to her face by melting snow and sweat. Her lips had gone blue, and her eyes rolled back in her head as she tried to speak. But what stopped him cold was the enormous swell of her belly beneath her inadequate dress, the way it moved with a life of its own. She was pregnant, heavily so, and even through his thick gloves, he could feel the tremors running through her body when he touched her shoulder. She wore no coat, only a thin woolen shawl that had long since stopped providing any warmth, and her feet were wrapped in strips of cloth that had disintegrated during her journey through the snow. "Please," she whispered, and her hand shot out to grip his wrist with surprising strength. "Please help me." Xander did not hesitate. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shaking form, then lifted her as gently as he could. She cried out in pain, and he saw her hands clutch at her belly. The baby was coming. He could see it in the way her body tensed, the way her breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with the cold. He had maybe an hour, probably less, before this child entered the world, whether anyone was ready or not. His camp was a quarter-mile back, tucked into a stand of pine trees that provided some shelter from the relentless wind. He had been heading into Casper to sell his furs when the storm hit, forcing him to make camp and wait it out. Now he thanked whatever God might be listening that he had been here, that he had seen her, that he had not been 5 minutes slower on the trail. He mounted his horse with her cradled in his arms, ignoring the way every muscle in his body protested. She was not heavy, but she was dead weight, and he had to grip her tightly to keep her from sliding off. She moaned against his chest, and he felt the warmth of her breath through his shirt. Alive. She was alive, and he intended to keep her that way. The ride back to camp seemed to take forever, though it could not have been more than 10 minutes. The snow had intensified, turning the world into a white blur where earth and sky became one. He navigated by instinct, following the dark shapes of the pines until he saw the orange glow of his fire still burning in its ring of stones. He had built it up before leaving, banking it with enough wood to last through the afternoon, and now he sent up a silent prayer of thanks for that foresight. He dismounted and carried her to the fire, laying her down on his bedroll. She curled onto her side immediately, clutching at her stomach and crying out in a language he did not recognize. It sounded Spanish, but different, the vowels softer and the consonants sharper. He stripped off his gloves and touched her forehead, feeling the fever that burned beneath her icy skin. She was caught between freezing and burning, her body at war with itself. "My name is Xander," he said, though he doubted she could understand him. "I am going to help you. Do you understand? I am going to help you." Her eyes opened, and for a moment they focused on his face. They were brown, he saw, a deep, rich brown like the earth after rain. She nodded once, then gasped as another contraction seized her body. Her back arched, and she gripped his hand hard enough that he felt his bones grind together. Xander had helped birth calves and foals, had even assisted when his sister delivered her first child 5 years ago in Texas. But this was different. This woman was alone in a blizzard, miles from any doctor or midwife, dependent entirely on him and whatever skills he could muster. He felt the weight of that responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing, heavy and demanding. He added more wood to the fire, building it up until the heat washed over them in waves. Then he grabbed his canteen and a clean cloth from his saddlebag, using the cloth to wipe the snow and sweat from her face. She turned toward the touch like a flower toward the sun, and he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. "Where did you come from?" he asked, even though he knew she probably could not answer. "Where is your husband? Your family?" She shook her head violently, and her hand went to her throat. There was a bruise there, he saw now, purple and yellow and shaped like fingers. Someone had choked her. Someone had hurt her badly enough that she had fled into a blizzard, pregnant and alone, preferring to die in the snow rather than stay where she was. Rage flooded through him, hot and fierce, and he had to take a deep breath to force it down. Anger would not help her now. She needed him calm, needed him focused. He could be angry later when she was safe and the baby was delivered, and he had time to think about what kind of man would do this to a woman. Another contraction hit, and this time she screamed. The sound cut through the howling wind, raw and primal, and Xander felt his hands shake as he reached for her. He had to check how far along she was, had to see if the baby was coming now or if they had time. The thought of doing such an intimate examination on a stranger made his stomach clench, but there was no choice. Modesty had no place here, not when lives hung in the balance. "I have to check," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. "I have to see how close the baby is. Do you understand?" She nodded, biting down on her lower lip hard enough to draw blood. He pushed up her dress, which was soaked through with melted snow and other fluids he tried not to think about. She wore nothing underneath, and he felt his face heat despite the cold. He had seen naked women before, had lain with 3 in his 24 years, but this felt different. This was not about desire or pleasure. This was about survival. The baby was crowning. He could see the top of its head, covered in dark, wet hair, pushing against the opening. His sister's labor had taken 12 hours from start to finish, but this woman had clearly been in labor for much longer than that. She must have been walking through the snow while contractions tore through her body, must have been fighting to stay alive and keep her child alive for hours before he found her. "The baby is coming now," he told her, even though he suspected she already knew. "When the next contraction hits, you need to push. Do you understand? You need to push." She said something in that language he did not recognize, but the meaning was clear enough. She understood. She was ready. She had been ready since the moment she collapsed in the snow, her body demanding that this child be born no matter where she was or who was with her. The next contraction came fast, and she bore down with a strength he had not expected. Her face went red, the veins standing out in her neck, and she made a sound like a wounded animal. The baby's head emerged further, and Xander supported it with his hands, terrified that he might hurt this tiny, fragile thing. "Again," he urged. "Push again." She did, and the baby's head came free in a rush of fluid and blood. Xander cradled it carefully, marveling at how impossibly small it was. The face was scrunched and purple, the eyes sealed shut. He checked to make sure the cord was not wrapped around the neck, remembering that detail from his sister's delivery, and felt relief wash through him when he found it clear. "One more," he said. "One more big push, and it will be over." She screamed and pushed, and the baby slid out into his waiting hands. It was a boy, he saw, tiny and covered in white vernix and blood. For a horrible moment the child did not move, did not cry, and Xander felt his heart stop. But then he remembered what the doctor had done with his nephew, how he had cleared the baby's mouth and nose. He used his finger to sweep the baby's mouth clean, then rubbed the small back vigorously. The baby gasped and let out a thin wail that was the most beautiful sound Xander had ever heard. The mother sobbed and reached for her child, and Xander laid the baby on her chest, pulling his coat up to cover them both. The cord still pulsed between them, and he knew he needed to tie it off and cut it, but for just a moment he let them be, let the mother hold her son and feel the warmth of his small body against hers. He found a clean strip of leather in his saddlebag and tied the cord in 2 places, then used his knife to cut between them. The blade was sharp and the cut was clean, and the baby barely seemed to notice. Xander wrapped the child in his spare shirt, the softest piece of fabric he owned, and helped the mother adjust so she could hold him more comfortably. You did it, he said softly. You brought him into the world. He is beautiful. She looked up at him with those deep brown eyes, and he saw something in them that made his chest tighten. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Recognition, maybe, or connection, as if she had looked at him and seen straight through to his soul, had weighed him and found him worthy. Thank you, she whispered in heavily accented English. Thank you for my life, for his life. What is your name? He asked. Sophia, she said. Sophia Rivera. Sophia, he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. That is a beautiful name. And what will you call your son? She looked down at the baby, who had stopped crying and was now making small snuffling sounds against her skin. I do not know, she admitted. I had not thought I would live long enough to name him. The words hit him like a physical blow. She had been running toward death, had accepted it as inevitable, and yet she had kept moving anyway. For the baby. Everything she had done had been for the child she carried, the life she was determined to protect even at the cost of her own. Well, you lived, Xander said firmly, and now you get to watch him grow. But first, we need to get you both warm and fed. Can you drink something? She nodded, and he helped her sit up enough to take small sips from his canteen. The water seemed to revive her somewhat, bringing color back to her cheeks. He heated some broth over the fire, using the last of his dried beef, and fed it to her spoonful by spoonful. She ate slowly, as if she had forgotten what food tasted like, and with each swallow, she seemed to grow a little stronger. The afterbirth came 20 minutes later, and Xander dealt with it as clinically as he could, wrapping it in an old blanket and setting it aside to bury once the storm passed. Sophia watched him with hooded eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her now that the immediate crisis had passed. The baby slept against her chest, his tiny fist curled near his mouth. You need to rest, Xander told her. The storm will blow itself out by morning, and then I can take you to Casper. There is a doctor there, a real one. He can check you both over, make sure everything is as it should be. No doctor, Sophia said, and there was fear in her voice. No town, please. Xander frowned. You need proper care, you both do. I am just a cowboy. I do not know anything about babies or what you need after giving birth. What if something is wrong? What if you start bleeding or the baby gets sick? No doctor, she repeated more firmly this time. He will find me. He will take my baby. The words sent a chill down Xander's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Who? He demanded. Who is looking for you? Sophia's hand tightened protectively around her son. My husband, she spat the word like a curse. Rodrigo Rivera. He is a powerful man. Rich. His family owns much land near Wasco in California. When I became pregnant, he said the baby was not his. He said I had been with another man. He beat me. He tried to kill the baby. She pulled down the collar of her dress, showing Xander a landscape of bruises and half-healed cuts. His stomach turned, and that rage from earlier returned twice as strong. What kind of monster did this to his own wife, to the mother of his child? He locked me in a room, Sophia continued, her voice hollow. He said when the baby came, he would take it away, and I would never see it again. He said he would give it to strangers or leave it in the desert to die. But his cousin felt sorry for me. She helped me escape. She told me to go north, to get as far away as I could before Rodrigo realized I was gone. But I had no money, no food. I walked. I hid in wagons when I could. I made it to the Wyoming Territory before the storm came. Tears streamed down her face now, and Xander reached out to wipe them away without thinking. His rough fingers were gentle on her soft skin, and she leaned into the touch like it was a lifeline. You walked from California to Wyoming? He asked, incredulous. That is over 1,000 miles. I had 3 months, she said, and I would have walked 3,000 miles if that is what it took to keep my baby safe. Xander sat back on his heels, his mind racing. He should take her to Casper, should let the law handle this. But he had seen enough of frontier justice to know that a rich man with connections could make problems disappear. If this Rodrigo was as powerful as Sophia claimed, he might have men looking for her even now. She might not be safe anywhere that people could recognize her or ask questions. "Where were you trying to go?" he asked. "I do not know," she admitted. "I just knew I had to keep moving. If I stopped, he would catch me. If I let my guard down, he would find me and take my baby." The baby in question chose that moment to wake up, his small face scrunching as he began to cry. Sophia looked down at him in panic, clearly not sure what to do, and Xander felt a surge of protective tenderness so strong it almost knocked him over. "He is probably hungry," Xander said. "You need to feed him." Sophia's face flushed red. "I do not know how," she whispered. "I do not know anything about babies. My mother died when I was young, and I had no sisters. Rodrigo's family would not teach me. They said I did not deserve to learn, since I had brought shame on their name." Xander took a deep breath, reminding himself that he was not a violent man by nature. But if Rodrigo Rivera ever crossed his path, he might make an exception. "It is natural," he said gently. "Your body knows what to do. Just hold him to your breast and let him find it." He turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with tending the fire and checking on his horse. The animal had weathered the storm well, standing patiently in the shelter of the trees with its head down and its tail to the wind. Xander rubbed its nose affectionately, grateful for the company. He had been alone for a long time, traveling from town to town with no real destination in mind, and he had not realized how much he missed having someone to talk to until Sophia had appeared in his life like a gift from heaven. Behind him, he heard the baby's cries quiet and then stop altogether, replaced by small, suckling sounds. Sophia made a soft noise of wonder, and when he glanced back, he saw her staring down at her son with such love and awe that it made his throat tight. This was what he had been missing, he realized. Not just company, but purpose. For 6 years he had been drifting, moving from place to place because he had nowhere else to be and nothing better to do. His parents were dead, killed by cholera when he was 18. His sister had married and moved to Oregon with her husband. His friends had all gone their separate ways, chasing gold, or land, or whatever dreams kept men moving west. He had been alone because he had no reason to be anything else. But now, looking at this woman and her newborn son, he felt something shift inside him. They needed him, not just for tonight, but for however long it took to keep them safe from the monster who called himself Sophia's husband. And maybe, just maybe, he needed them too. The storm raged through the night, but the fire held strong, and the three of them stayed warm beneath Xander's coat and blankets. Sophia slept fitfully, waking every hour when the baby cried for food or comfort. Xander stayed awake, keeping watch and feeding wood to the flames. He could not have slept anyway, not with his mind racing through possibilities and plans. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the world covered in a thick white blanket that sparkled in the weak winter sun. Xander stood and stretched, his back protesting after a night spent sitting upright. Sophia was awake, nursing the baby and watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "What will you do with us?" she asked quietly. Xander considered his answer carefully. He could leave her in Casper with some money and wish her well. He could help her find work, maybe as a cook or a seamstress, something that would let her support herself and the baby. That would be the smart thing, the sensible thing. It would let him go back to his solitary life without complication. But he found he did not want to do the smart thing. He wanted to keep them close, wanted to make sure they were safe, not just today, but tomorrow and the day after that. He wanted to see the baby grow, wanted to watch Sophia smile when she was not scared or hurting. He wanted things he had no right to want from a woman who was still legally married to another man. I have a place, he said finally. It is not much. A cabin in the mountains about a week's ride from here, near a town called Sheridan. I built it 2 years ago when I was trapping for a season. It is remote, but it is solid and warm. Nobody knows about it except me. You would be safe there at least until spring. By then, maybe we can figure out what comes next. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? You would take us in even though you do not know us? Even though I might bring trouble to your door? Yes, Xander said simply. I would do that. She looked down at the baby, who had fallen asleep with his mouth still attached to her breast. When she looked back up, there was something new in her expression. Hope, maybe, fragile and tentative, but there nonetheless. Why? She asked. Xander moved to sit beside her, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Because it is the right thing to do, he said. And because nobody should have to run forever. Especially not someone as brave as you. Sophia reached out and took his hand, her fingers small and cold in his. I do not know how to thank you. You do not have to thank me, Xander said. Just get strong, get healthy, raise your son. That will be thanks enough. They left camp an hour later, after Xander had buried the afterbirth and packed up his gear. He fashioned a sling from his blanket so Sophia could carry the baby against her chest, keeping him warm with her body heat. She was weak and unsteady on her feet, but she refused to be carried. She had walked 1,000 miles, she said. She could manage a few more steps. Xander put her on his horse and walked beside them, leading the animal carefully through the snow. The going was slow, with drifts that came up to his knees in places, but he did not complain. Sophia dozed in the saddle, her head drooping forward, and Xander found himself watching her more than the trail. Even exhausted and battered, she was beautiful. Not in the delicate way of the saloon girls he had known, but in a fierce, elemental way that made him think of wild horses and mountain storms. They made camp early that first day, after only covering 5 miles. Sophia was running a fever again, and the baby would not stop crying. Xander boiled water and made her drink it hot with a little honey mixed in, the last of his supply. He sang to the baby while Sophia slept, old songs his mother had taught him, and eventually the child quieted and joined his mother in sleep. On the 3rd day, Sophia was strong enough to walk part of the way. She moved slowly, leaning heavily on a walking stick Xander had cut for her, but she moved. Her determination amazed him. Most people would have given up by now, would have let despair win, but not Sophia. She kept going because stopping was not an option. They talked as they traveled, sharing stories to pass the time. Xander learned that Sophia had been born in Mexico, in a small village near the border. Her father had been a farmer, her mother a weaver. They had been poor but happy until her mother died, and her father, consumed by grief, had drunk himself to death within a year. Sophia had been 12, alone, and with no way to support herself. An aunt had taken her in, but the woman's husband had looked at Sophia with eyes that made her skin crawl. So when Rodrigo Rivera had come through town, a wealthy Californian looking for a wife, Sophia had accepted his proposal even though she barely knew him. She had thought marriage would save her. Instead, it had been a different kind of prison. Xander told her about his own past, about growing up in Texas with more dreams than sense. His father had been a rancher, but a drought had killed most of the herd, and debt had claimed the rest. His mother had worked herself to death trying to keep the family afloat, and his father had followed her 6 months later, his heart simply giving up. Xander and his sister had sold what little remained and gone their separate ways, each trying to outrun the ghosts of their past. I am sorry, Sophia said when he finished. I am sorry you lost your family. I am sorry you lost yours too, Xander replied. But maybe we can build something new. Maybe family is not just about blood. Maybe it is about the people you choose to stand beside. Sophia looked at him with those deep eyes, and Xander felt something pass between them. An understanding, maybe, or the beginning of something more. He pushed the thought away. She had just escaped one bad marriage. The last thing she needed was him confusing the situation with feelings she might not share. They reached the cabin on the 8th day, and Sophia wept when she saw it. It was small, just 2 rooms with a sleeping loft, but it was solid and tight. Xander had built it himself, cutting the logs and notching them to fit, chinking the gaps with mud and moss. There was a stone fireplace that drew well, a window with real glass, and a door that latched from the inside. It was humble, but it was safe. Xander spent the next week making the place more comfortable. He built a proper bed frame and stuffed a mattress with pine needles and dried grass. He cut more firewood than they could possibly use, stacking it along the wall until there was no more room. He rode into Sheridan and bought supplies with the money he had earned from his furs: flour and sugar, coffee and salt, a pot of honey, and a sack of dried apples. He also bought fabric, soft cotton in a pale blue, and needles and thread. Sophia needed proper clothes, and the baby needed diapers and blankets. When he returned to the cabin, he found Sophia up and moving around. She had swept the floor and washed the windows, and she was heating water in the kettle over the fire. The baby slept in a basket Xander had woven from willow branches, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. "You should be resting," Xander said, setting down his packages. "I have rested enough," Sophia replied. "I want to help. I want to do my share." "Your share is getting healthy and taking care of that baby," Xander said firmly. "Everything else can wait." But Sophia was stubborn, and by evening she had made bread from the flour and cooked a stew from the dried beef and apples. It was the first real meal they had shared, and Xander found himself watching her across the table, marveling at how natural this felt, like they had been doing this forever, like they were a family. The baby thrived. Sophia had decided to name him Samuel, after a saint she said protected travelers. Xander thought it was fitting. The boy had certainly traveled further in his first week of life than most people did in a year. Samuel was alert and curious, his dark eyes following movement, even though Xander knew babies were not supposed to be able to see clearly yet. He rarely cried except when he was hungry, and he seemed to sleep better each night. Sophia was healing too, though more slowly. The bruises faded from purple to yellow to green and finally disappeared altogether. Her body recovered from the trauma of birth, and color returned to her cheeks. But the shadows in her eyes remained, and Xander often woke in the night to find her standing by the window, staring out at the darkness as if expecting to see Rodrigo's face looking back. "He will not find you here," Xander told her one night when he caught her at the window again. "I promise." "You cannot promise that," Sophia said. "He has money and power. If he wants to find me badly enough, he will." "Then I will deal with him if he comes," Xander said. The words came out harsher than he intended, and Sophia turned to look at him with surprise. "You would fight for me? For us?" "Yes," Xander said without hesitation. "I would." Sophia crossed the room and stood before him, so close he could smell the soap she had used to wash her hair. "Why?" she asked. "What are we to you?" Xander wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to say that she had become the center of his world without him even realizing it, that he woke each morning eager to see her smile, that he lay awake at night listening to her breathe, grateful for each peaceful moment, that he loved her son as if the boy were his own blood, that he loved her, though he had no right to say it. But he could not put any of that into words, so instead, he reached out and cupped her face in his rough palm. She leaned into the touch, her eyes closing, and Xander felt his heart beat so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "You are everything," he whispered. Sophia's eyes opened, and what he saw there made him bold. He leaned down and kissed her, gently at first and then deeper when she kissed him back. She tasted like honey and hope, and Xander felt something in his chest crack open, letting light flood into places that had been dark for so long. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia rested her forehead against his. "I am still married," she said. "In the eyes of God and the law, I am still his wife." "I do not care," Xander said fiercely. "That man beat you and tried to kill your child. The law might say you belong to him, but the law is wrong. You belong to yourself. And if you choose to give yourself to me, then I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." Sophia pulled back to look at him, searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. "I choose you," she said simply. "I choose us." Xander kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. They moved to the bed, and he loved her with a gentleness that made her weep. After, they lay tangled together beneath the blankets, listening to Samuel's soft snores from his basket by the fire. "What happens now?" Sophia asked. "Now we live," Xander said. "We build a life together. We raise Samuel, and maybe if you want, we have more children. We grow old and gray, and we do not waste a single moment being afraid." "What about Rodrigo?" "If he comes, I will deal with him, but he will not take you, and he will not take Samuel. That I swear." Spring came slowly to the mountains, but it came. The snow melted, revealing green grass and early wildflowers. Xander taught Sophia how to fish in the creek that ran behind the cabin, and she taught him words in Spanish, laughing at his terrible accent. Samuel grew fat and happy, his dark hair growing in thick, and his eyes remaining the same deep brown as his mother's. They existed in a bubble of peace, isolated from the rest of the world. Xander went into Sheridan once a month for supplies, but otherwise they stayed on the mountain, content in their small corner of paradise. He expanded the cabin, adding another room for Samuel, and building a proper barn for his horse and the milk cow he bought from a neighbor. Sophia transformed the cabin into a home, sewing curtains for the windows and rugs for the floor. She planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil through sheer determination. She sang while she worked, old songs from her childhood, and Xander found himself humming along even though he did not know the words. They were happy, genuinely, completely happy. Xander had not known such a thing was possible. He had thought happiness was something other people experienced, something always just out of his reach. But here, with Sophia and Samuel, he had found it. The trouble came in late summer, on a day when the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. Xander was splitting wood behind the cabin when he heard horses approaching. He set down the axe and walked around to the front, shading his eyes against the sun. 3 men sat astride expensive horses, their clothes dusty from travel, but clearly well made. The man in the center was older, maybe 40, with silver streaking his black hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the cruelty in his eyes. He looked at the cabin the way a man might look at a piece of property he intended to buy, calculating and cold. "Can I help you?" Xander asked, keeping his voice neutral. But his hand drifted toward the gun at his hip, and he positioned himself between the men and the cabin door. "I am looking for my wife," the man said, and Xander's blood turned to ice. "Sophia Rivera. I have information that she may be in this area." "I do not know anyone by that name," Xander said. Rodrigo Rivera smiled, and it was like watching a snake bare its fangs. "I think you do. I have been looking for her for almost a year now. I have spent a great deal of money hiring men to search. One of them saw a woman matching her description in Sheridan last month. She was with a man who fits your description, and she was carrying a baby." Behind Xander, he heard the cabin door open. He did not have to turn around to know Sophia was standing there. He could feel her presence like heat from a fire. "Rodrigo," she said, and her voice was steady, despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "Hello, my dear wife," Rodrigo said, and the false sweetness in his tone made Xander's skin crawl. "You have led me on quite the chase. I trust you are ready to come home now, and face the consequences of your actions. I am not going anywhere with you, Sophia said. I am done being your victim. Rodrigo's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure rage. You are my wife. You belong to me. The law says so. Then the law is wrong, Sophia shot back, echoing Xander's words from months ago. I will not come with you. I will not let you hurt my son. That bastard is not my son, Rodrigo snarled. I told you before, you whored yourself out to some other man and tried to pass his spawn off as mine. Xander moved before he could think, his fist connecting with Rodrigo's jaw with a satisfying crack. The man tumbled from his horse, and his two companions immediately drew their guns. Xander raised his hands, backing up slowly. Shoot him, Rodrigo said from the ground, wiping blood from his split lip. Kill him and take my wife. The two men hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly. Boss, we agreed to help you find her, one of them said. We did not sign on for murder. I pay you to do what I tell you, Rodrigo hissed. Now kill him. Put the guns down, came a voice from the trees, and Xander felt relief wash over him. Sheriff Thomas Brennan stepped out of the woods, his own weapon drawn and aimed at Rodrigo's men. The sheriff was a good man, honest and fair, and Xander had made a point of befriending him over the past months, just in case something like this happened. This is a domestic matter, Rodrigo said, getting to his feet. It does not concern you, Sheriff. Any matter involving drawn guns in my territory concerns me, Sheriff Brennan said mildly. Now, somebody want to tell me what is going on here? That woman is my wife, Rodrigo said, pointing at Sophia. She ran away from me almost a year ago while she was pregnant with another man's child. I have come to take her home where she belongs. That is not true, Sophia said, stepping forward. Samuel was strapped to her chest in the sling she always used, and she held him protectively as she spoke. I ran away because he beat me, because he tried to kill my baby, because staying with him would have meant death for both of us. Rodrigo laughed. You see, Sheriff, she is hysterical. She makes up lies to cover her infidelity and disobedience. Women are prone to such fantasies. I have done nothing but try to be a good husband, and this is how she repays me. Sheriff Brennan looked between them, his expression thoughtful. Madam, do you have any proof of these allegations? Sophia hesitated, then handed Samuel to Xander. She unbuttoned the top of her dress and pulled it down, showing the sheriff the scars that crisscrossed her back and shoulders. They were faded now, thin white lines against her brown skin, but they were unmistakable. Whip marks, burn scars, the evidence of systematic abuse. The sheriff's face went hard. Did you do this? He asked Rodrigo. A husband has the right to discipline his wife, Rodrigo said. The law gives me that authority. The law also says I can arrest a man for assault, Sheriff Brennan countered. And those look like more than discipline to me. Those look like torture. You cannot arrest me, Rodrigo said confidently. Do you know who my family is? We have friends in the territorial government. We have judges and politicians in our pocket. One word from me and you will lose your position. Maybe, Sheriff Brennan said. But I will still sleep well at night knowing I did the right thing. You and your men need to leave. Now, if I see you anywhere near this cabin again, I will arrest you and let the court sort out who has more power. Rodrigo's face went purple with rage. She is my wife. She is a human being who deserves to live without fear, the sheriff said. Now get out of my sight before I forget I am a lawman and let Finch here finish what he started. Rodrigo looked at his men, clearly expecting them to back him up, but both had already holstered their weapons. They were hired help, not fanatics, and they had no desire to die for a man who beat his wife. Rodrigo climbed back onto his horse, his movements stiff with fury. This is not over, he said to Sophia. You are still my wife in the eyes of God and the law. I will be back for you. If you come back, I will kill you, Xander said quietly. Not as a threat, as a fact. You will not take her. You will not take Samuel. And if you try, I will put you in the ground. Do you understand me? Something in Xander's tone must have convinced Rodrigo he was serious because the man paled. He wheeled his horse around and kicked it into a gallop, his men following close behind. They watched until the three riders disappeared over the ridge, and only then did Xander let himself breathe. Thank you, he said to Sheriff Brennan. I owe you. You do not owe me anything, the sheriff said. I was just doing my job, though I have to tell you, this situation is complicated. He is right that the law is on his side. A wife is considered her husband's property, and he has the legal right to take her back. What about the abuse? Sophia asked. Harder to prove than you might think, the sheriff said gently, especially when the man in question has money and connections. I can keep him away for now, but eventually someone higher up than me is going to get involved, and when that happens, I cannot guarantee your safety. What are you saying? Xander asked. I am saying you need to think about your options. There are places out west where people do not ask too many questions about your past. California has a law now that recognizes abandonment as grounds for divorce. If you could prove he abandoned her, or that she had reason to fear for her life, a judge might grant her a divorce. Then she would be free to marry whoever she wanted. Xander looked at Sophia, and she looked back at him. California is where he is from, she said. If we go there, we walk right into his territory. Not if you are smart about it, the sheriff said. California is a big place. There are parts of it that are still wild, where a man can disappear if he wants to. And with that gold rush a few years back, there are plenty of new people flooding in. You could start over, build a new life, be free. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Free. It was what Sophia had been running toward all along, what she had walked 1,000 miles to find. And now it was being offered to them, wrapped up with danger and difficulty, but possible nonetheless. What do you think? Xander asked her. Sophia looked down at Samuel, who was starting to fuss in his arms. I think I am tired of running, she said. I think I want to stand and fight. And if going to California is what it takes to be truly free, then that is what we do. Then that is what we will do, Xander said. They spent the next month preparing. Xander sold the cabin to a trapper he knew, a man who asked no questions and paid in gold. He bought a covered wagon and 2 strong horses, then filled the wagon with supplies for the long journey west. Sophia sewed clothes and packed their few possessions, saying goodbye to the home that had sheltered them through the winter and spring. The trip took 3 months, following the Oregon Trail southwest until they could branch off toward California. They traveled with a small group of other settlers, safety in numbers, and Xander hired on as a scout to pay their way. Sophia cooked for the group in exchange for extra provisions, and Samuel charmed everyone with his ready smiles and gurgling laughs. It was hard travel, harder than anything Sophia had endured before. The weather was hot and dry, the terrain unforgiving. They crossed rivers and mountains, deserts and forests. People got sick, wagon wheels broke. But they pressed on, driven by the promise of a new life waiting at the end of the trail. They reached Sacramento in early December, almost exactly a year after Xander had found Sophia in the snow. The city was loud and crowded, full of people chasing dreams of gold and glory. Xander did not linger. He bought directions to a settlement called Wasco in the southern part of the state, a small agricultural town where land was cheap and people were friendly. It was also, ironically, the area where Rodrigo's family owned land, but it was a large area, and Xander gambled that they could disappear into the landscape. They settled on a plot of land about 20 miles from Wasco proper, in a valley between 2 low hills. It was beautiful country, green and fertile, with a stream running through the property and oak trees providing shade. Xander built another cabin, this one larger than the one in Wyoming. He built it with his own 2 hands, while Sophia set up a tent for them to live in and planted a garden. Samuel learned to walk on that land, taking his first wobbling steps between his mother and Xander, falling down and getting up again with the determination he had inherited from Sophia. They lived quietly, avoiding town as much as possible. When they did need supplies, Xander went alone, using a false name and keeping his head down. It was not a perfect solution, but it worked. Months turned into a year, and then another. Samuel grew into a bright, curious child who followed Xander everywhere, chattering in a mix of English and Spanish. Sophia bloomed in the California sun. She was happy here, genuinely happy, and Xander fell more in love with her every day. They had not been able to marry, not legally, but they had stood together under the oak trees and spoken vows to each other with only Samuel and God as witnesses. That was enough. It had to be enough. The letter came in their third spring in California. Xander picked it up when he went to Wasco for flour and salt, handed to him by the postmaster, who said a lawyer had been asking around about a woman named Sophia Rivera. Xander's blood had gone cold, but he took the letter and rode home as fast as he dared. Sophia opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a legal document, written in formal language that Xander had to read twice to understand. It was a decree of divorce. Rodrigo Rivera had divorced Sophia on the grounds of abandonment and adultery, and the divorce had been granted by a judge in Wasco 6 months ago. Sophia was no longer his wife. She was free. Why? Sophia whispered. Why would he do this? The answer came in a second letter, delivered a week later. This one was from Rodrigo himself, written in Spanish that Sophia had to translate. He had remarried, he said, to a woman from a good family who had already given him a son. He no longer needed Sophia or her bastard child. She was an embarrassment to his family, a stain he wanted erased. The divorce was his way of wiping the slate clean. She was dead to him, and he expected her to return the favor. Sophia cried when she read it, but they were tears of relief rather than sadness. She was free, truly, legally free. That afternoon, she and Xander rode into Wasco and stood before a justice of the peace. They married in a simple ceremony with Samuel as their witness, and when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her like it was the first time all over again. Life after that was sweeter than Xander had ever imagined possible. He worked the land, planting wheat and vegetables, raising cattle and horses. Sophia sold her vegetables in town, and her skill with herbs and healing made her a respected figure in the community. People came to her when they were sick, and she helped them with the knowledge her mother had taught her. Samuel started school in Wasco, riding into town 3 days a week to learn his letters and numbers. He was a smart child, quick with figures, and fascinated by books. Xander built him a shelf for his growing collection, and Sophia made sure he did his homework every night. 2 years after they married, Sophia told Xander she was pregnant again. He was terrified, remembering that night in the snow, but Sophia laughed at his worry. This time was different, she said. This time she was healthy and safe and had a real doctor nearby. This time she would not be alone. She was right. Their daughter was born on a warm June evening, delivered by the doctor in Wasco with Xander holding Sophia's hand the entire time. They named her Elena, after Sophia's mother, and Samuel declared himself her protector from the moment he saw her. Elena was followed by another son 2 years later, whom they named Xander Jr., but called Jack to avoid confusion. Jack was loud where Samuel had been quiet, bold where Elena was cautious. He kept them all on their toes, always climbing something or chasing something or getting into mischief. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. Xander and Sophia built their farm into something substantial, a place they could be proud of. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to be a lawyer, determined to help people the way Sheriff Brennan had helped his mother. Elena became a teacher, opening a school for the children of farm workers who could not afford to send their kids to town. Jack followed in Xander's footsteps, taking over the farm when Xander's back started giving him trouble. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xander and Sophia stood on their porch and looked out over the land they had built together. Samuel was in Sacramento, studying law. Elena was teaching in the schoolhouse Jack had built for her. Jack was out in the fields with his own young wife, harvesting wheat. They had 7 grandchildren between them, with another on the way. Did you ever imagine this? Sophia asked, leaning against Xander's shoulder. When you found me in the snow, did you think we would end up here? No, Xander admitted. I thought I was just trying to keep you alive through the night. I had no idea you would become my whole world. Sophia smiled and turned to kiss him. You saved my life that night. You saved mine too, Xander said. I was just existing before you, moving from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a reason to be alive. You gave me a family. You gave me everything. They stood together in the fading light, watching the sun set over the fields they had planted and the home they had built. The wind carried the sound of Jack's laughter and the distant cry of a hawk. Somewhere in the house, one of the grandchildren was singing a song Sophia had taught them, the words in Spanish about a woman brave enough to walk through fire for the ones she loved. Xander thought back to that night in Wyoming, to the woman who had collapsed in the snow, pregnant and terrified, and determined to survive. He thought about the baby he had delivered by his fire, tiny and perfect and full of possibility. He thought about all the moments that had led them here, the choices and chances and small miracles that had woven their lives together. I would do it all again, he said quietly. Every hard moment, every difficult choice. I would do it all again to end up right here, right now, with you. Sophia squeezed his hand. So would I. They went inside as the stars began to appear, closing the door on another day in the life they had built together, a life that had started in desperation and fear, but had become something beautiful and whole, a life filled with love and laughter, with children and grandchildren, with the quiet satisfaction of work well done and promises kept. The fire in the hearth burned bright, warming the room just as Xander's fire had warmed them on that first night. But this fire represented something different. Not just survival, but home. Not just rescue, but choice. Not just two people thrown together by chance, but a family forged through love and commitment and the determination to build something lasting. Outside, the California night was warm and still. Inside, Xander and Sophia sat together in their comfortable chairs, her hand in his, watching the fire and talking about their day. They spoke of small things and big things, of plans for tomorrow and memories from yesterday. They spoke with the ease of two people who knew each other completely, who had weathered every storm together and come out stronger for it. When they finally went to bed, climbing the stairs to the room they had shared for 20 years, Xander pulled Sophia close and breathed in the scent of her hair. She still smelled like the soap she made herself, still felt perfect in his arms. He knew every curve of her body, every scar and every smile line. He knew her moods and her dreams, her fears and her hopes, and he loved every single part of her. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness. For what? Sophia asked sleepily. For choosing me, for staying, for building this life with me. Sophia rolled over to face him, her eyes finding his even in the dark. You are the one who stopped. You are the one who saw a stranger in the snow and decided she was worth saving. Everything we have comes from that choice. We saved each other, Xander said. Yes, Sophia agreed. We did. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the life they had created. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. There would be grandchildren to spoil and crops to tend, letters from Samuel and visits from Elena. There would be Sunday dinners with the whole family gathered around their table, 3 generations of Finches sharing food and stories and love. But tonight, there was just this. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had fought for their right to be together, who had built something permanent and precious out of nothing but determination and love. 2 people who had started as strangers in a blizzard and had become each other's everything. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own share of happiness and difficulty. Xander's hair turned silver, and Sophia's laugh lines deepened. Their hands became weathered and worn, but they still fit perfectly together. They watched their children grow and succeed, watched their grandchildren take their first steps and speak their first words. They celebrated weddings and mourned funerals, welcomed new babies, and said goodbye to old friends. Through it all, they remained constant. 2 points of light in each other's darkness, two hearts beating in perfect rhythm. They had started with nothing but hope and had built an empire of love. Every fence post on their land, every tree they had planted, every room in their house told a story of their partnership and perseverance. On Xander's 60th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, he stood to make a toast. His voice was not as strong as it once had been, but it carried clearly in the warm evening air. 57 years ago, he said, I found a woman in the snow. She was pregnant and alone, running from a monster and heading towards certain death. I helped her because it was the right thing to do. I stayed with her because I could not imagine doing anything else. And I have loved her every single day since with everything I have. He looked at Sophia, who sat at the head of the table with Samuel's youngest daughter on her lap. You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a family. You gave me a life worth living. Everything good in my world comes from you. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and she smiled at him with a radiance that took his breath away even after all these years. And you gave me freedom, she said. You gave me safety. You gave me the chance to be more than someone's property. You saw me as a person when the rest of the world saw me as an object. You loved me when I had nothing to offer but trouble and complications. You are my hero, Xander Finch, today and always. The family cheered and raised their glasses, and Xander sat down feeling like the richest man alive. Because he was. Not in terms of money or land, though they had enough of both, but in terms of the things that truly mattered, love and family, and the knowledge that his life had meant something. That night, lying in bed beside his wife of nearly 40 years, Xander felt content in a way he had never imagined possible. Every scar had been worth it. Every struggle had led to something beautiful. Every moment of fear and doubt had been redeemed by the love they had built together. I am grateful, he told Sophia, for all of it, for every day I get to wake up beside you. I am grateful too, Sophia said. You showed me what love was supposed to be. You taught me that I deserved kindness and respect. You gave me back my dignity and my voice. I would not be who I am without you. We made each other, Xander said. Two broken pieces that fit together to make something whole. They drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Just as they had faced every challenge before, hand in hand, heart to heart, two souls intertwined so completely that they had become one. The final years of their lives were peaceful. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, passing on stories and wisdom. They rocked on their porch and remembered the adventures of their youth. They held hands and watched sunsets, grateful for every ordinary moment. When Xander finally passed away at the age of 78, surrounded by his family, his last words were simple. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. Sophia held his hand until his heart stopped, then continued holding it for hours afterward, unwilling to let go. She lived another 5 years without him, cared for by their children and grandchildren in the house they had built together. She told stories about the night he found her in the snow, about the cowboy who had delivered her baby by his fire, and then had given them both a home. She spoke of his kindness and his strength, his gentle hands and his fierce love. When her time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. Her family buried her next to Xander under the oak trees, where they had spoken their first vows. The gravestone read simply, Sophia Rivera Finch, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She walked 1,000 miles for love and found it waiting by a fire. Their children and grandchildren continued to work the land they had claimed, passing it down through generations. The story of how Xander and Sophia met became family legend, told and retold until everyone knew it by heart. It was a story about courage and kindness, about two people who had saved each other when the world had given up on them both. It was a story about a woman who refused to give up, who walked through snow and suffering to protect her child. It was a story about a man who saw someone in need and stopped to help, even though it would have been easier to ride on by. It was a story about how love can bloom in the harshest conditions, how family can be chosen rather than given, how two strangers can become everything to each other. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple and true. The kind of love that transcends circumstance and survives adversity. The kind of love that builds legacies and changes lives. The kind of love that starts with a single choice to be kind, to be brave, to open your heart to someone who needs it. And in the end, that love had created something eternal. Not just children and grandchildren, though there were many. Not just land and property, though they had built a prosperous farm. But a testament to the power of human connection, to the strength found in partnership, to the beauty of two souls finding each other in the wilderness and deciding to walk the rest of the road together. The fire Xander had built that long ago night in Wyoming had gone out decades ago. But the warmth it had provided, the life it had saved, the love it had kindled, all of that remained. It lived on in every Finch who told the story, in every couple who heard it and felt inspired to fight for their own happiness, in every person who learned that sometimes the greatest adventures start with a simple act of compassion. Xander and Sophia's story became part of the fabric of their community, woven into the land itself. People spoke of them with reverence, holding them up as an example of what marriage should be, what love could accomplish. Young couples getting married would sometimes make the pilgrimage to their graves, laying flowers and asking for blessings. The house they had built remained standing for 100 years, sheltering generation after generation of their descendants. And every winter, when the snow fell and the wind howled, someone in the family would tell the story again. They would speak of a pregnant woman collapsing in the snow, near term and desperate. They would describe the cowboy who found her, who warmed her by his fire, who helped deliver her baby in the middle of a blizzard. They would talk about how that single night had changed everything, how one choice to be kind had rippled forward through time to touch hundreds of lives. The story always ended the same way, with Xander and Sophia old and gray and happy, surrounded by the family they had built together, looking back on a life well lived. It ended with love triumphant, with good defeating evil, with two people who had every reason to give up instead, choosing to fight. It ended with hope and joy and the promise that no matter how dark the night, dawn would eventually come. And that ending, that happily ever after, was not fiction or fantasy. It was real. It had happened. Two people had loved each other truly and completely, had built a life together that honored them both, had created something beautiful out of circumstances that should have destroyed them. That was the legacy Xander and Sophia Finch left behind. Not just descendants or property, but proof that love wins, that kindness matters, that every person has value and deserves dignity, that families can be chosen, that second chances are possible, that even in the darkest moments when all seems lost, there is always hope. Their story lived on, passed down through generations, a beacon of light for anyone who had ever felt lost or alone or worthless. It reminded people that heroes exist, that true love is real, that miracles happen every day when someone chooses compassion over convenience. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this world, Xander and Sophia were together still, walking hand in hand through fields that never ended, surrounded by warmth and light, finally at peace. The journey that had started in terror and pain had ended in joy and completeness. They had walked their 1,000 miles and found exactly what they had been searching for, a place to belong, a person to love, a life that mattered. The snow had tried to claim them both that night so long ago, but the fire had saved them, and from that fire had come everything: children and grandchildren, laughter and tears, challenges and triumphs, and most importantly, love. So much love that it overflowed their small lives and spilled out into the world, touching everyone it reached, transforming everything it touched. That was the real miracle of Xander and Sophia's story. Not that they had survived, though that was remarkable. Not that they had prospered, though they had worked hard for their success. The true miracle was that they had loved, fully, deeply, without reservation or condition. They had chosen each other every single day, through sickness and health, through poverty and plenty, through youth and age. They had built their love deliberately and carefully, like Xander had built their home, piece by piece until it stood strong against any storm. And in doing so, they had proved that love is not something that happens to you. It is something you create, something you nurture, something you choose. It is work and commitment and sacrifice. But it is also joy and fulfillment and meaning. It is everything that makes life worth living. So when people told the story of the woman who collapsed in the snow and the cowboy who delivered her baby by his fire, they were really telling a story about the choice to love, about seeing someone at their lowest and deciding they are worth saving, about opening your heart even when it is scary, about building something together even when the odds are against you, about faith and courage and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. That story, that choice, that love, it was Xander and Sophia's gift to the world. And it was a gift that would keep giving generation after generation, inspiring others to be brave enough to love, kind enough to help, strong enough to build something lasting. The fire had gone out long ago, but its warmth remained, eternal and unchanging, a reminder that even the smallest flame can hold back the darkness if you tend it carefully and protect it fiercely. Xander and Sophia had tended their flame for a lifetime, and now others carried it forward, keeping it burning bright. And that was the truest happily ever after of all.